So I just wanted to start by addressing this kind of cornerstone or crutch question that is the frame for the forum. So is Christianity a cornerstone or a crutch? Yes. As a Christian, I believe wholeheartedly that Christianity is a crutch. I believe that the world is broken. I believe that we don't have to look very hard today to see various examples of violence, see various examples of the world not being exactly what we desire it to be, and I believe that we cannot, of our own efforts, solve those problems. So yes, Christianity is a crutch, but to me, it's also the cornerstone. I believe that Jesus Christ is the literal embodiment of the infinite, all-powerful, eternal divine, paradoxically in a very specific human person who died, and by his death and resurrection makes it possible for us to fight for, to see, to believe, and to bring about the kingdom of God. Now, when people say Christianity is a crutch, there's two basic ways of thinking about it. As a person who does work in rhetoric, I believe that human beings get by using crutches. I believe, for example, that there are more events, ideas, concepts, and things in the world than our language can name. So we have to stretch language in order to make it address the infinite plurality of events in the world. I believe that human reason is a powerful tool, but is limited in certain kinds of inquiry. I believe that we are bound by specific cultures and times. I believe all those things that make it difficult for us to imagine getting through the world without having conceptual crutches that organize for us and make sense out of our experience for us. So I believe all human beings in some way rely on concepts in order to make their way through the world. Now, if you say Christianity is a crutch in the sense that it's the opiate of the masses, or that it's a cosmological life insurance policy, to that I'd say it's a very strange kind of crutch. It's a crutch that tells you that your primary obligation is to die to yourself and to die to your desires. It's a crutch that tells you that the primary thing that orients your relationship to the world is others and the ultimate other. It's a crutch that tells you that in order to understand and to know, at least from the sense of the propositions that we have about God, that you have to embrace paradox, you'd have to embrace the difficulty of knowing, you'd have to embrace that we cannot, in the context of human language and the finitude of human reason, know or fully come to terms with the ultimate reality, and yet we can know it not as a proposition, but as a person in Jesus Christ. So is Christianity a crutch? If it is, it's an awfully strange one that makes awfully strange demands on you. Thanks.
Thank you, and now I'll invite Dr. Rhodes to make similar opening remarks.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone, to SLOW, as I was told to call it. Speaking of slow is how you say it.
I like it. I'll accept it.
Thank you to SLOW for having me, and thank you to the Veritas Forum for putting this on. When you become a rhetoric professor, you dream, I think most of us do, of opportunities of addressing crowds of this size and of this intellectual stature. So it's truly a privilege to be here.
I only dream of being here with you, Joe.
It's not your turn.
Sorry, I apologize.
That's my job, right?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I've been moderated.
Where's Lester? His strategy in these things is to out-charm me. He always wins by out-charming me. No, there's no winners. Okay, I remember. I was raised in the church. My father was a Pentecostal minister, and I don't know how big that is on the West Coast, but I'm from Alabama, and I grew up in a church building, essentially. When you're a preacher's kid, you're in church Wednesday night, Sunday morning, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it feels like. And one of my earliest memories from childhood is actually my grandmother. I was about 4 to 5 years old, coffee table about like this ottoman, and I remember standing up on top of it with a huge Bible. The Bible was bigger than me, and I remember waving it around and trying to embody my father's sort of performative gesture And I remember my grandmother and my grandfather sitting there watching me, and they would clap, and they would say, "Oh, there's Mama's little preacher man. You're going to make me so proud." In short, I grew up with a sense of Christian destiny. I remember being in a youth group, much like some of the youth groups that you're a part of, many of you, and being told, "Joe, you have so much influence. You're such a leader. You're going to do great things for the church one day." And when I was in college, two significant things happened to me that have, at least so far, there are some people who still doubt it, but at least so far have led me to not fulfill that dream. One, I was part of a young, fledgling, Rick Warren-type, purpose-driven church that was full of love and compassion and friendship and kindness, until one day the minister said he believed in predestination from the pulpit. And apparently 60% of the church did not believe this. And instead of simply saying, "Well, one can believe this or not believe it, what does it really matter? We all love God and we're all in this together, we all share the same idea of who Jesus was," they literally became a mob of hatred. And I remember saying, these people who started a church, think about how much dedication and commitment it takes to God to start a church and plant it. These people who were so passionate, supposedly, about Jesus, had forgotten everything that Jesus had said about love and compassion and blessing those who may have different opinions than us and who are poor in spirit. All the gospel, they had forgotten it. And I remember saying, if these people can't get it, then what is this thing about? And it was about that time I started experiencing some doubts, and I picked up a book by Christopher Hitchens called "God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything." And I think Hitchens, though, didn't know how smart he was at the moment, but I think he's correct, that it's religion that poisons everything, not God. But I picked up this book, and I remember in the book he asked a question. And the question was, why doesn't God heal amputees? Lizards grow back tails all the time. This is not a feat of nature that even nature cannot accomplish. This is something rather easily done. We see plants, we see some animals. Why don't human beings, one, pray for their limbs to grow back, knowing that the Bible says if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can take it for your own? Why don't they even pray it? And it's because they simply know it's not going to happen. And I've found myself in this moment having to come face to face with the sort of breakdown of everything I had believed, and I started from scratch. And I stand before you today. I change what I call myself every day. Some days I say I'm a believing unbeliever. Some days I say I'm an unbelieving believer. Some days I say I'm a reverent agnostic. Some days I say I'm a Christian atheist. And some days I just say I don't care. I believe, here's what I believe about belief. I believe that Jesus was a profound, insightful, wise rabbi who wanted to reform Judaism and who would not recognize many of what you in this room probably call Christianity today. I think he would be utterly dumbfounded by what has become Christianity. Second, what I believe is that we need to alter our understanding of Christianity if it's going to stay here, and it's going to be a formidable force, and I do believe it will be, from an idea of a belief system to a practice. When someone goes to yoga 4 days a week, we don't ask them, "Do you believe in yoga?" No, they simply practice yoga. And so I stand before you not believing in the divinity of God, not believing in the divinity of Jesus Christ any more than I believe in the divinity of you or me, which may be more than you think, but as someone who practices Christianity. I still go to the First African Methodist Episcopal Church. I still love singing the old hymns, and I still recognize that prayer changes you. But prayer does not change God, because I doubt every day that a God exists.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that leads us well into our first question. And that is, yes or no, is Christianity, are the things that Christianity teaches true? And what does it mean to say that a religion is true or not true? Is there such thing as a yes or no, it is or it isn't truth, when we're talking about religions or religious beliefs? And I guess I'll ask that to Dr. Rhodes first, and then to Dr. Lundberg, because it seems like at the end you were coming down fairly clearly to say that maybe that doesn't matter, or it's the wrong question. So could you say more about that?
I think you're exactly right. I think my position is that it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. One of the things that in studying theology I've found compelling, remarkably for my position, is Bonhoeffer's position in The Cost of Discipleship. And that position is this: Jesus does not, at least our passing downs of the stories of Jesus, Jesus in those stories does not walk around and say, "Excuse me, sir, fisherman, will you believe a logical proposition that X is Y and Y is Z, and I am that X and God is that Y?" Instead, what he does is he comes up to people and he says, "Follow me." He clearly does not seem to think it matters a lot what logical propositions you hold to be true or false in your head. If he did, he would have been Socrates and not Jesus. Instead, what Jesus cares about is, do you love your neighbor? Do you feed the poor? Do you bless the meek? The biblical Jesus that I see thinks that logical propositions are irrelevant. And so when we talk about, is this true or false, my first step is to say, what does it matter? The second part of that is that, to add on to that, is I want to state clearly that when we say, is Christianity true, we've uttered a sort of nonsensical sentence, I believe. I believe what we mean to say is, are certain tenets of a dogmatic creed true? I.e., was Jesus born of a virgin? Was Jesus the Son of God? Something I've said before, and I know Chris has a response to, which is that he never claimed to be the Son of God. And if we did a lot more time reading our Greek and reading our Hebrew and attending to the context, the political, social, historical context of the Bible, we would know, instead of just taking at face value what our minister tells us. But we have to ask ourselves, is Christianity true? Well, for me, it actually is true. But that's because for me, it simply means that love is the supreme ideal, and that if you love perfectly, you will lose your life in this world. You won't have money because you'll be poor. You will have given away everything. And eventually, as Christ shows on the cross, and as Dr. King showed us, and as John Lennon showed us, and as many people have shown us, if you love perfectly in this life, you will lose your life. And in losing your life, you actually gain victory over death. But that is not a metaphysical statement. That is a historical fact. The metaphysics of Christianity are irrelevant to what Jesus came to do.
I think I'd start with the idea that belief is a kind of habit of mind that's like an action or like a practice. So I wouldn't say that on one hand, the folks in the audience who are people who believe are simply holding to a set of doctrines, and that's not continuous with some kind of practice. So I think then the question is, what are the kinds of beliefs that best open us up to the possibility of the kind of love that you're talking about? And that is, I think, the way to answer the question, is Christianity true? Because as I said at the beginning, of course, how do we judge whether or not a proposition is true? We say, does that proposition match a reality that's external to it? And I think when we're talking about God, who is infinite, and when our language is finite, that we're going to get into all kinds of very strange paradoxes if we talk about God simply as a proposition. In fact, Christianity is organized around him, isn't it? Fully human, fully divine. 3 members of the Trinity, essential unity in the Godhead. So the question is, I think, are there other ways to think about how we'd come to know what is true? And I'll cite my own Dietrich Bonhoeffer here. He has a book called Christ the Center, where he says, if we try and ask what is God in the person of Jesus, or if we try and ask how is God in the person of Jesus, then we don't really get what's the kind of revolutionary core of Christianity. The answer there, the kind of knowledge there, is a kind of knowledge where we know by being in relationship. And so Bonhoeffer says the right question is, who is God as manifest in the person Jesus Christ? And I think it makes a big difference in terms of how we think about practices. Because to me, I'd say, it's more than just singing the hymns. It's more than just living a life that's oriented towards ethical practice. Those are undoubtedly good things. But to me, those things are not the end of Christianity. Those things are a product of a practice that has me say, look, there's something about me which is finite. There's something about me which is fallen. There's something about me, the way that I'm beholden to my own desire. I'm beholden to my own pattern of thinking. I'm beholden to my culture. And what I need is something that breaks me out of that by opening me to a reality which is radically different from me and yet grabs me and affirms me as an individual person who is bound up in relationships. And so to me, the beauty of Christianity is that it upholds multiple modes of knowing. We know by proposition, we know by practice, but we also know first and foremost by being in relationship. And to my mind, to subtract that element of being transformed by being in a relationship to someone who is radically different than you makes it difficult to really live out the project of truly loving. I mean, part of the claim of Christianity is that it is impossible for us on our own merits to love as radically as we ought to, because there is a certain kind of giving of yourself, of self-abnegation that happens in love. And so in order to do that, we need to really own the die to yourself part, as opposed to the idea that we throw ourselves radically into love, and the result is that we give up some of our interests.
I think, I have two sort of points of tension with that position, and I'll highlight one quickly, and before I highlight the one that I think may be more substantive. The first one is, what I hear you describing leads to a radical subjectivism, bordering on relativism of what Christianity looks like. And not to go into a Bonhoeffer hole, but I think he's the perfect counterexample to the very thing you said, or perfect demonstration of what you said, but I think it's important for the audience to know where that leads. To say, follow Christ. There's no laws, there's no rules. Jesus doesn't say, hey, excuse me, fishermen, love your neighbor. He says, follow me. And that means that if I follow him, whatever that might mean to you, according to the stories we have from the New Testament, that anything is possible if I feel Christ tell me to do it. For the perfect example of this, you look at Bonhoeffer's life. In The Cost of Discipleship, written long before the Nazi menace is bearing down upon him, and an idea that truly threatens his life, we get a Bonhoeffer who is adamant that violence and resistance to evil through violence is strictly forbidden from Jesus, and that is the message of the cross. Only 6-8 years later, he's in a Nazi prison, and he helps participate in the assassination, or the attempted assassination, of Adolf Hitler. And in his letters and papers from prison, he writes some regrets about the cost of discipleship. But this has been defended theologically in the sense that you can believe in nonviolence and Jesus can tell you nonviolence until suddenly Jesus changes his mind and says, except for this one time, violence. That's not a Christianity that functions as a religion. In that sense, radical subjectivism simply means that Jesus can tell any one of you anything is right. What if you think I'm Hitler and you're following Jesus and he says, that guy's the Antichrist, kill him? That doesn't make any sense. So it leads to a subjectivism in morality. The second thing, and I think this is more important, is the Crutch argument comes back into play here. You're right in the sense that I agree with you on everything you say, which is that yes, it's a practice. Yes, it's a creed. Yes, it has these forms, but it's much more than that. So the second problem comes when those like myself who are left out. The form of Christianity that I hear described by that statement is a Christianity that's only for the few, not for everyone. And I use my own life as an example. Many atheists and agnostics will stand up here and pretend like there's no gap and no hole left in their life now that religion is gone. I do not do that. When I'm down and I'm troubled and the world feels like it's caving in on top of me, I turn to my friends and my family. I don't have to tell you what happens. They let you down. And when they let me down, I have no one else to turn to. I have tried praying. I have tried loving. I have tried serving. I have tried listening, studying, reading, and there is no peace. And you say, well, you have to do this, do this, do this. I promise you have to trust me. I've tried everything you're going to tell me to try. It's not there for me. I've said for a long time now that if Christianity, assuming we mean basic evangelical Christianity, is true, Calvinism must be true also. I cannot, if I ask all of you to doubt right now that you're sitting in this chair in this room, doubt it. Really, genuinely doubt it. You cannot do it. And in the same way that you cannot doubt you're in this chair, I cannot believe that there's a loving, personal God who cares about my life on this earth. I cannot.
I'll take the first one first, and then I'll do the second. So when you say that it is subjectivism, there's actually a rich history behind the idea of subjectivism. And subjectivism means that the person who is seeing is the judge. So I could claim, Jesus told me to do anything. Jesus told me to come to the Veritas Forum. Jesus told me to spill pizza on my shirt. Jesus told me whatever. Now, I think that the problem is the logic. And one other thing. We treat Christ like it's Jesus' last name. But it's not, right? Jesus is a specific human person, and Christ is a title. And that title means anointed. It means that Christians have a belief that Jesus of Nazareth is the specific person who embodies a kind of divine communication.
So he's the only Christ.
Yeah. So that form of divine communication has its own intention and own message behind it, and its own logic. And that's the logic of a God who loves the universe into existence and who wants to meet with and have relationship with the creation. And so there is a specific, like every human being is specific and particular, there is a specific and particular instantiation for the purpose of coming to terms with and allowing for communication with God. Now, what that means is that that relationship is not subjective because there's another subject there. There's a relationship between two. And that relationship between the two makes certain kinds of demands on us. It makes a radical demand that we also ought to love as he loved. And to love in that way is to want the ultimate and absolute best for every person that we treat as an object of our care or an object of our love. It means that we have to relate to them in a way that entails certain kinds of value propositions, like a respect for their intrinsic dignity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there is a kind of force, a moral and normative force, that's bound up in the idea that it's not just subjective, but it's about the attempt of God to communicate with human beings on human terms. And just like when I receive any message from anyone, that message makes a demand on me that is not just about my interpretation, but is about the terms of relationship. And to me, that is the most strong and most certain possibility for how human beings come to moral decisions. Right? We don't make morality by rules. We don't make morality simply by formula. We make morality because we can imagine what it's like to stand in someone else's position and think about the conditions of our actions on that person. Human morality emerges out of relationships, and as a result, I don't think it's simple subjectivism to say that a relationship with Jesus means you can say whatever you want about what God calls you to do, because there's a basic logic to how God is made incarnate in the person Jesus. And as for the...
Before you go to the second one,
please.
I just want to make sure I understand what you mean by that. Are you saying that God continues to have that relationship and speak a new revelation? Or do we just need to simply look to the New Testament and apply it in a sense? Like, right? Like, so if Hitler, if you're in World War II and it's Hitler and you've been preaching love and nonviolence and Hitler rises, are you saying that God could tell you to assassinate Hitler? That relationship could lead to that?
God could do whatever God wanted to do.
I know,
There's a logic and a force to the story that I think would argue against that.
Okay, gotcha.
And as for the second, I respect your authenticity. I respect your vulnerability, and I think it is a gift for you to have let us into what has been not just a struggle for you over any number of things. And all I can do is offer my friendship and consolation and say that I care for you.
I don't want pity.
It's not pity, though. It's not pity. That's the point. I mean,
I want you to advise the people in the room who want to believe and simply cannot. Their minds cannot assent to such a thing.
Why?
Well, I wonder if the two of you could talk more generally about why that would matter. So it seems like you're feeling a lack of maybe a structure, because clearly an atheist and a religious person can perform the same actions. So what is it that you might want instead, and is it even really better? And I'm guessing that you would think it is better, but why does it matter to have that kind of structure?
That's a great question. I think that does clarify the terms. I think what does it matter, and what are we talking about? We're saying that I don't think it matters at the intellectual level. I do have the structure. The structure is I go to church on Sundays, I sing, I hold hands, I close my eyes, I hope for good things when we have prayers. I say, God, if you're up there, please be doing something better than what we got going on right now. Help these people, right? I do that. I have the structure. I know the doctrine. I've studied the text. I've spent hours listening in silence for the voice of God. That is not what's missing here. What's missing is the very idea that you find, I think, at the core of this thing, which is the feeling, the emotions that I am loved by the creator of the universe. And you will come up to me after this, many of you will, and tell me I'm loved, and I appreciate that, because I love human love. But when crap hits the fan, I'm going to call you, and you're going to be busy. And I'm not going to find some divine source of love to be my crutch. That feeling's not there. And what you call the relationship, that this creator created something he wants a relationship with, well, that may very well be true. But that relationship for me must at least be open to change, like that God wants different relationships with different beings, and that for some beings, that relationship is going to be almost a deistic relationship.
God's
I create it, I start
you.
it, natural order. God's just not into me. Like, he's just not into me. He just doesn't. And if I were going to believe in a theology, I think I would almost have to believe in sort of Aquinas and sort of natural law. Yes, there is a good and an evil, and that's about as far as I can go when it comes to theology. I don't feel like the creator of the universe loves me, cares for me. No conversation can spark such a thing. No reading can spark such a thing. And so I think we just have to start out from the get-go by saying and looking at them honestly, if this is where we're going to be, and say, some of you, sorry, God doesn't want a personal relationship with you.
I think that this is, we had a conversation about this once before in a car in Las Vegas. And funny story, I'll leave it for later. I'll leave that for the reception. And if you recall, the thing we were talking about, Joe, is what does it mean to love?
Yep.
And do you remember the positions we took?
We did. I believe we were talking about spouses and human relationships, and
We were?
you took the position that you choose to love someone, which
Yes.
I do, and I believe in relationships, if they're going to work, is absolutely necessary.
So the context of our dispute was whether or not you love someone at first sight or whether or not you choose to love someone. And there's this great old idea that the Greeks had about knowing something. And one of the things they said was that the Greek word for truth, aletheia, right? It actually means something akin to not forgetting. Also an unconcealing or a revealing of something. And what's so beautiful about that concept to me is that to know something as a truth was not to just know it as a proposition, but it was to kind of see the beauty of it. And as an extension of that, there's this beautiful point the Greeks made. They said, if you want to know how knowledge of something works, you have to understand a basic principle of complementarity. Like is known by like. In other words, the more we become like something, the more we're able to know it in a different and deeper way. When I think about my relationship with my wife, I said this last time she saw the tape, I got in a little trouble, but it's true for anyone who's married. There are times when
You're going to do it again? You're doubling
gonna
down?
do it-
You're
Beth-
doubling down on the story?
Beth Lundberg, I love you. You're the most wonderful woman that I know. But sometimes in any relationship, the feeling of love is not there. What there is a commitment to love. What there is a decision to throw yourself into something and towards someone. And at least I find that in my life and in my relationships, when I make that decision, I am not only made more like the person, but I am able to know them more deeply than I otherwise would. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'd say is, I don't know what it is that God has planned for your life, and that's between you and God. I know what it is that God offers all of us, but I also know that to me, it seems like the question is not the question of the feeling as much as it is the question of the decision to love. Now, I don't know, maybe you've made the decision.
Well,
you know,
you know I'm a pragmatist, and I fully am supportive. The action comes before the emotion. The question is not, do I love God?
Well,
I have done the loving actions, everything that you've been taught. I served as a youth minister in a church for years, and constantly sought to bless others with testimony and service and care. I did everything that follow me could possibly mean for a normal, as far as, I don't know what else I could have done as a 22-year-old person. And I still continue. As a professor, our lives are spent, I think good professors, our lives are spent caring for you and serving you and trying to be there for you and guide you into your own self-actualization and support your own endeavors, and it brings us pure joy to most of us. It brings pure joy to love you and care for you and be there for you. I don't know, I'm not running a big bank. I'm living a life that I feel like is giving a lot of my time and energy and thought and care to others. What would you tell anyone else like me, including me, if you say you have to love first and then you'll feel it? No, I feel like I love something. I feel like I love you, and of course there's clear theological ways for me to argue that loving you, I love God because you're the image of God, using some Old Testament fun Judeo-Christian mysticism. We can get there, serving the stranger is serving God, and et cetera, et cetera. But that still will not get me to a place where I feel consoled and loved in my own time of need. I can console and love you in your time of need. but this divine source is simply not available as a resource to me. And I know there are people in the audience that would say the exact same thing. And I just think we're doing an injustice to those people who are looking and searching for that meaning and telling them, oh, well, here it is. You need to read this, or you need to pray this, or you need to go give away things, or you need to love them. And not being honest with them that you're probably still going to feel pretty crappy most of the time. If you read Kierkegaard, if you read Augustine, if you read some of the greatest theologians of our time, most of them lead really miserable, depressed lives where God feels completely distant.
Could I ask more generally, would you say then that that has formed your identity? So your identity is someone who's asked this question and gotten the answer no, and is that good enough? And then I'll ask that to Dr. Lundberg. What does a Christian identity look like if it's different from that, or does it feel a lot like that on a lot of days? So what would you say, so you listed a lot of different identities. I'm a this and a that, and I don't even remember. It was too much. It was a lot.
Sorry.
So no, it's good.
There's a lot of men there.
Because life is like that, right? You can't put a price on that. So how would you say that that's shaped? Do you have a unity to that identity as someone who shifts these around, or do you just shift different labels on different days?
No, I mean, I do shift labels on different days. I think that we need, for me, and I think this will get us to a core theological tenet that Chris and I probably disagree on, I think. And that is that I don't feel compelled to choose. Having studied the text closely and having prayed and having thought and talked, there is nothing in the Bible that makes me feel like if I do not choose, or that if I don't do something happens after I die that's bad. It's just not in the text. It's not there. And if you read it closely, I think you'll see it's not there as well. And so given that, which when I was young, as for many of you probably, that was the only real reason you had to choose, is you might die and go to this horrible place forever. Once you give that up, then religion becomes alive. And even though I stand before you as someone who doesn't believe in a supernatural, all-powerful creator of the universe, who cares about me as a little being on earth, and somehow distinguishes between me and ants, or me and birds, or whatever it may be, like whatever your idea of that is, I don't hold any of that. Religion's alive for me.
Sorry.
Siri does not agree.
Siri?
It's not
Siri,
my
I didn't
phone.
use any deep theological words, Siri. Stay with the group.
I missed it too, Joe.
Doggone it. I'll repeat that.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your request.
I'm imagining thousands of years from now when they dig up the transcripts of these things and try to study them, like what they're going to make of that. Like a random person in the crowd said, I don't know what to make of that.
Siri's going to be digging them up in 1,000 years.
But, so religion's fully alive for me. Every day I start a new book on it. Every week I start a new book on it. Every day I have a new conversation about it. And I have that conversation with Muslims, with Sikhs, with Baha'i, with Jews, with Christians, with agnostics. I teach a class on rhetorical theology at UNLV. And the first day of class, I had a student introduce himself as a Christian atheist. And I was just like, oh man, what I've been saying for years has finally caught on. Yay! But it's alive. You all have way more profound and new ideas and exciting ways of understanding religion because it's alive for you. I believe that once you come to this once you understand religion as an assent to a logical, dogmatic creed, that's when religion becomes dead. And so yes, my faith changes not every day, but often. I would say literally, seriously, 2 or 3 times a semester. I would give a different answer to that question. And I would also include that a lot of times it has nothing to do with where I'm at, but with who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to a Christian evangelical minister, I'll probably call myself a believing unbeliever. But if I'm talking to an atheist, I may call myself a Christian atheist. Because I think that communication is about meeting the other person and moving them and having this sort of open dialogue. And using these sort of complex phrases and paradoxical terms invites a sort of alive discussion with people. Oh, I didn't know that was an option. Most of you probably didn't know Christian atheism's an option. But it's a real live option for you. And I hope some of you choose it. But if you don't, that's okay too. But I think we got to get to a place where, in the same way that I can find a painting, the most beautiful painting, and hang it on my wall for 10 years, I can wake up one day and say, that painting no longer has the same meaning for me it once did, and seek beauty elsewhere. And I'm seeking beauty right now in Judaism. I'm returning to Jesus' Jewish roots and sort of the Hebrew stories. And I anticipate after that looking to Islam and seeking beauty and truth. One of my biggest, I think our biggest disagreements is this idea that Christianity has the one, it's the thing, and it's not Islam. I mean, I think that you hold that position. That I don't want to speak for you, I'll let you speak for you, but I think that that's for me, that was our biggest disagreement last time we spoke about this, was that somehow Christianity is special. It is special, but it's no more special than any other faith, and we should learn from all of them, and we can worship all of their gods. The founder of Christianity was a polytheist. Abraham believed in many gods, and in fact, he saw 3 at one time and ran to them and served them. So I think we need to get back to that idea of an open belief system.
This will probably be the last comment before we move to questions. So do you agree that Christianity can be a danger when it's treated as a fixed identity, or do you think there's something important about that narrowness?
So I guess the way I'd approach this question is to say, what is it that makes up the possibility of a human having an identity? And there's a number of things we could say, right? We could say, you come from a certain tradition, you come from a family that does X, Y, or Z, you read the following books, you've been in a relationship with different people. And one of the questions when we think about ourselves in terms of our identities is that if you look very close at anyone's identity, I think what you'll find is that an identity is a kind of coping mechanism. It's something that helps you get through the world by telling a story about who you are, by telling a story about where you're from, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the real danger for the project of religion is that so often we ask the question, what is it that I can do that allows me to shore up my identity by picking from a series of traditions or things that interest me? And so you say, does it console me? Do I find beauty in it? Does it affirm me? And I think the revolutionary core of Christianity is in the idea that it's not about you. It's about Him, or it's about God. I mean, gendering God specifically is very difficult, and obviously there's limitations to language, yada, yada. But having said that, the point is not about me. The point is about the one who is radically other to me. The point is not about my consolation. The point is not about the beauty or vitality of my faith. The point is not about how I feel when I engage in it. The point is in modeling the idea of an infinite God who paradoxically becomes a finite human, nothing that we could ever rationally square, right? Contradicts the law of identity. And in following that story of that God-man who willingly subjects himself to death, I am opened up to a model and a transformative relationship that reconfigures me by asking a different question than how my religion affirms my identity. I am asked to put my identity to death so that I might live differently. And it's this, Paul says, the cross is a stumbling block. And I think what he means is there are so many projects in the world that we have a self-certainty about their terms of their morality, their ability to be successful. The loudest people are the ones who are the most certain about what they think and what they'll do as a result. And to me, the narrative of the gospel says you could never have a kind of certainty about the purity of your own motive, about how you'd reasoned a problem through, but instead you have to break up what is your identity for the sake of being open to the entry of Christ, who is different from us, who is resurrected, and who believes in the redemption of the world. And in doing so, I'm charged with doing what I can to help the world resurrect, not just in the long term of the end of the cosmos, but in the sense that each one of us is called to take up a project which is not our own, which he directs us towards. So yeah, to me it's not about what I get from it, how I feel about it, how it consoles me, and hypothetically, it should in some way about being fundamentally disorienting my identity so I can be open to something which is utterly different, that changes me, that remakes me, that resurrects me, or something, I don't know.
Do you want a brief 30-second
I have a brief response,
reply?
which is simply that I didn't realize you were a Lutheran. Like that was straight Luther, Reformed theology. That's interesting. But more importantly, I think that, and interestingly enough, I think that we've been talking a lot about this sort of turn inward, and I think it's because it's the best. It's where I'm at right now. But for years, I would have said, you're right, that it's not about you. But I would never have said it's about looking up either. I think there's a core tenet that runs from Abraham running to serve the strangers on the horizon, that Levinas takes up this hospitality ethic, loving the stranger, taking care of the stranger among you, treat the foreigner among you like one of you, let them have Passover, do this, do that, all the way to Jesus and saying, just follow me, and then saying, let's feed some people. That instead of looking up, we should look at the feet of other people and wash them. And they're the tenet for me, and I'm speaking here not personally, but intellectually. For me, theologically, the message of the Bible is that Jesus is not about you. If you want to find Jesus, you find him by serving strangers. So I think we could pick that discussion up later maybe, or maybe even tomorrow. But
Yeah, I'm going to object a little bit to your use of up. Because I think part of the logic of the incarnation is everywhere, encompasses
Okay,
the whole
fair
thing,
enough.
directs
I like
us
that.
towards
Fair
the world.
enough.
But
Okay, I like that.
if you want to load the dice, Joe, fine. All these people saw it.
I'm never doing this with a debater again.
It's not a debate, okay? It's a love fest.
We have a couple of things we need to urgently do. One is that I need Devin for the obvious reason. We will invite questions from the audience, which I think you'll be able to text to some number, which may be there, or maybe a number that you already know.
wow.
Good. So you can start that. Even more urgently, we need to thank our speakers. So will you please join me in thanking them for their...
I like that. We should troll it.
So this question is, do you believe a completely secular person can live a perfectly fulfilling life in the same way that a believer can? So let's ask that one to Dr. Lundberg first, and then share it around. So do you believe a completely secular person can have a perfectly fulfilling life in the same way as a believer?
I mean, wouldn't you philosophers answer it by asking what is fulfilling?
That's where I was going to go.
I'm not a part of this.
Okay, fair enough.
You are on your
Shoot.
own.
I don't know. I mean, if I'm totally honest, I have a lot of atheist friends. Yeah, I know, right? And I am often awed by the kindness they show towards me, what I feel is the morality of their actions. That's nice. And I don't know if the question's kind of loaded. For me, the terms of fulfillment are to come and know the ultimate source of the universe. To the good old-fashioned kind of Latin definition of happiness as being settled in the place where you're supposed to be. I imagine that my atheist and/or agnostic friends would say that happiness is something different for them. I'd like to allow them the terms of their fulfillment. But I do believe that it is an important human task to come to know and love the source of all being. So, yes and no.
Can I follow up?
Of course.
Not
No,
with an
you have
answer.
to text
Not
it
with
to
an answer,
Slido.
but I want to ask a question that
Yeah.
I think the audience would that's a decent question in light of what we're debating, which is, okay, you want to allow me to set the own terms of my fulfillment. I think the question the follow-up question is, if I do, does anything bad happen when I die?
What do I believe?
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that there is a resurrection. I believe that there is a judgment. I believe I have no idea what God will ultimately do in that instance. I believe that the Scripture says that Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. There are broad historical debates about what that means. I tend to think that one is... I always give this answer by... There's an awesome Catholic theologian named Hans Urs von Balthasar who says, he has a book called Dare We Hope That All Men Be Saved. And his answer is, we should hope and pray as if they are, or we should pray as if they are not, but hope that they are. Judgment is God's, in my opinion. I have no idea what God's going to do when people die. I do know that Jesus Christ is a way to come to know and love God, and that we're offered the possibility of resurrection by faith, and that's what I believe. I think that's what the Scripture justifies. And getting back to the question of what is your fulfillment, I mean, when I say I want to allow you your fulfillment, you'll live your life on the terms that you're going to live them, and I believe that you'll ultimately live that life in relationship to, even if you don't recognize it. There is a, in my opinion, a God that, was incarnated in the person of Jesus Christ and is the source of your being that you already have a relationship to in some way. And I, hope that whatever it is generates fulfillment for you, creates fulfillment for you, but I think in the end the fulfillment is to come to know the source of one's being. And so that's as much as I can say in answering that question, but I do know that Christ is the path to resurrection and therefore the path to eternal life, and beyond that, judgment is God's, not mine.
So let's take an easier question next. This is a question about God's identity.
No.
Ready?
Piece of cake.
Good. So the question is, can there be one God that all the religions follow differently? So maybe the different practices are getting to a
Well,
God.
there's it was funny you said that. There was a book written during the Italian Renaissance that was banned that has this great story about, and some of you may know it, about a king who had a ring. And the ring was this perfect magic, divine ring that symbolized and gave him true sovereign power. And he had 3 sons, and he was about to die. And he knew that if he gave the ring to one son, that they would eventually end up warring with one another and fighting for that power and that authority. And so he came up with the genius strategy of having 2 identical copies made of the one ring. And no one could tell them apart, not even the king, once he had the other 2 and mixed them up. And he gave all 3 rings out to his sons, and those rings, and neither son ever knew which son had the real, true magic ring. And he did this in the hope that this would lead to peace. And the story, I think it may have come from a Hasidic tale, which is that these 3 rings are the 3 Abrahamic religions, and no one will know which ones are really true. No one's supposed to know which one's really true, and that we won't know until the final days is sort of the thing. I believe that if you study, and I know that I just had this conversation with my father, who just took a class on Islam because he wants to learn more about it. And he said there's no grace in Islam. He's like, that's the big thing that stuck out. There's no forgiveness. There's no grace. There's only the law. And that's true of Judaism until Christ reforms it. More importantly, not until Christ reforms it, until Christ is picked up by Roman authorities and used to have made that position of love and forgiveness and kindness. Because what better way to get people to be subject to your political rule than to teach them that the religion they've been following for years now says you have to love your enemy and forgive the people who are oppressing you. So there's a lot of politics involved here, but I do believe that all of the Abrahamic faiths and many other faiths can be a path to understanding the transcendent and the holy. And I think we need to recover concepts like the transcendent and the holy, which are totally different concepts than God. Because once we unbeing the thing, and we make it a source, not a man up there in the clouds, not someone who's anthropomorphized, who's like us and thinks like us and does things like us, but somehow just almost like this Big Bang mystical reality that's up there, then that's the path to peace. I think we have to love the world we live in and want peace for it.
So, I mean, yeah, language is an imprecise tool for recognizing and representing the character of God. Now, having said that, I think, as I said before, what I think is the unique thing about the particularly Christian view of it is that it holds on to this paradox that God, I don't think there's a very many Christians that think that God is like a human or is a kindly bearded man in space. The Scripture clearly says that God is a spirit, talks about God in terms of a number of metaphors. So what I'm interested in is the fact that the way Christianity presents its vision of truth is in a representation of someone who is fully God and fully human, and that person's specific human life opens up the possibility of us having relationship with and being open to what we'd call in Christian terminology God the Father, God the God that has no body and is not a bearded man, but is divine and creator of the world, etc. Now, I think if you understand the basic logic of that story, the most interesting thing about the New Testament that people don't talk about is this little part where the Scripture says that Christ did not consider equality with God something to be held on to, but he emptied himself. And the Greek word there is kenosis, and it literally means like a wringing out. And so I guess one of the things I think is that part of the narrative of Christianity is a way of getting us to wring out these propositions or concepts about God as this grand bearded chap in the sky, and instead to see the incarnation as the presence of God not only in Jesus, but then by proxy in the world, in our relationship to the world, and folks around us, etc. If that's the case, I think that a truly radical Christianity needs to change the terms of relationship that you've talked about when you say it justifies a certain kind of violence if people say that one path is exclusive. I think that you only can say that Christianity is the exclusive path if you also understand it in the context of God being wrung out, God being integrated into our world. And in fact, as a historical matter, a lot of the doctrines we have about intrinsic dignity, human rights, et cetera, come from a basic narrative that says in wringing out that old idea of God and in highlighting the idea of the incarnation, a new dignity is given to the world and then a set of new ethical demands. So do I think that someone could be totally self-certain about a specific narrow parochial religious view of the world and use it to create violence? Yes. Do I think that that is an embodiment of the logic of the incarnation? No. And in fact, the main thing I've seen preaching the Gospel of Luke recently is when you talk about a group of folks who are zealots, you know, Jesus is basically zinging religious authorities who think that you could militarily reestablish Israel and make it great again by establishing its own religious practices and re-articulating this idea that Israel was the unique or primary focus of God's history with the world. And Jesus' point to that is what? No, it's for everybody. So I think that while there is a risk that it entails elements of exclusion, I also think that the basic logic of the gospel behind it works so radically against that it's difficult for me to see what it would look like in practice. I don't mean in history, but like a person really following that logic. I don't see it.
I mean, I agree. I don't see it in the text, but it just seems that, you know, if we look at all of the violence that's been done in the name of Christianity, that perhaps a divinely inspired Luke should have made it a little more clear. Like how about the first sentence being, never kill someone in the name of Jesus? Like that would have been simple.
I think it's a fairly prevalent message to the
I think it's there. You see it's there, but it somehow was missed by a lot of crusaders and a lot of horrifying witch hunts. So I just think, I wonder if there's a way to get what it is you want without using that name.
I don't know if you watched a lot of political coverage this year, but I heard you can't always get what you want.
That's true. Sorry.
Well, I was going to interject that a student has asked a question that maybe you could answer more broadly. They ask, why do you think Jesus would be disgusted with Christians today? So you've mentioned violence in the past, but do you want to go political here? Do you want to name names? So this is a question to Professor Rhodes.
Go ahead, Dr. Rhodes. I told you we'd outdo Milo. Here it goes.
You can answer as generally as you want, or you can say you've said enough. It's up to you.
Well, here's the thing. Thanks. You think that I'm going to be angry, but I'm actually trying to control myself from grief. I do not assent to the logical creeds of the Christian faith. But that does not mean I do not love it. I do love it. I love it as a practice. I love it as fellowship. I love collective worship. I love corporate worship. It is fun. And I know I live in Las Vegas. I see EDM shows. It's fun to get together with one another and sing and dance. I love it. I care very much about it. And it breaks my heart to see it being used the way it's being used, and to see it doing things, see its name being used in the way that it's often being used. I don't want to do politics, but I'll simply just say, if you read Genesis and you read Exodus, what gets you destroyed is not sodomy. What is it that Lot makes Lot good? It's that he gave up his own family, his own daughters. He gave up to a violent crowd to be raped and abused in the name of protecting those who were strangers who he had welcomed into his home. We go from a biblical text that espouses at its core that you should give up your own family member before treating someone who's staying with you in your home unethically, before you take care of them. The stranger comes above your daughter. And for us to go from that all the way through Christianity and everything Jesus does, grace and love, and he who has the without sin cast the first stone, and blessed are the poor and the meek, and I can't fathom it, and it's heartbreaking. And my only solution at this point in time is to, and I think we talked a little bit about this before the show, I think a reformation is coming. I think a religious reformation is coming in this country. And I think that it must be structured in a return to Judaism and the Jewish elements in the story. We need to get back to studying hospitality and the basic tenets of religion from a Jewish perspective, because that's where the hospitality is. I was reading today that a mosque got blown up, and the rabbis from the synagogue went to the Muslim leaders and gave them keys to their own synagogue. That's hospitality, that's care, that's love. And so when people, I don't know what people are doing. When they say they're Christians and they're voting the way they're voting, or they're saying they support certain things, it makes me a little righteously indignated, but if that's a verb, but I just, I weep for my country when I think that God is just. And I think Thomas Jefferson held very similar deistic views as I did, and I have no problems affirming that statement. If there is a God, we have a reckoning coming, I believe.
I'm going to move to a different question, if that's okay. Do you want to jump in quickly?
No, it's fine. We can move on.
Well, the next question's for you. And it's one that maybe only you can answer. A student is asking for themselves and on behalf of Dr. Rhodes. It says, the Bible says, seek and you shall find. It sounds like Professor Rhodes has done plenty of seeking. Why is he not found? And another student asked, in a separate question, asked that about themselves, saying, I identify as a Christian, but when I pray, I don't get that, resonating with what Professor Rhodes has described. And then the student asks, am I still a Christian? Where does that leave me?
So on the second one of my favorite passages in the entire Bible is found in the prayer in Mark where a person comes to Jesus and says, I believe, help my unbelief. And to me, I believe, help my unbelief is a statement about what perfect faith looks like. In the sense that it's not about the person's feeling. The person admits explicitly at the outset that they are in a condition where they don't have the emotive, affective kind of charge that directs someone towards belief. But then there's this moment of the decision. And it's a specific kind of decision, right? It's not just a decision that I'm going to be more religious, or I'm going to be a better person, or I'm going to fulfill my New Year's resolutions. In this instance, it's a specific decision for the person of Jesus. And now, I don't know, maybe the person who asked the question has also felt like they've made a specific decision. But the question, of course, is not feeling. The question is, as Joe started out with, practice. And I believe that if we think about this as a relationship, then different relationships unfold over different periods of time with different conditions. And to be honest, Joe is a great friend. I know him well. We do this fun thing on the road every once in a while. But I don't know that we could ever know what the true degree of seeking is in any person's heart. That's something that's so radically internal to each one of us, you know? So all I can say is that the model for that has to be, I believe, help my unbelief, because it's the decision that creates the investment and not the investment that's the prerequisite to decision. As you said before, it's the action that generates the emotion. Now, I do want to say one thing real quick about the previous question. I think what's going on in America right now is insane. And I mean that as a question of our political culture. I think it's become virtually impossible for us to talk to each other in any meaningful way. I think it's become virtually impossible for us to see the possibility that there's merit in either side's decisions, that we've become totally bifurcated. And I think that as a result, there's a kind of attitude in politics in America that's about resentment, that's about backlash, and that creates some really dangerous conditions that we're seeing unfold around us. And the thing I want to say is that I think that the point of the resurrection of Jesus Christ is not just that we're made eternally secure. I think the point of it is that there's a logic to how governments operate, there's a logic to how states operate, and that logic is a logic of scarcity, and it's a logic of death. I believe ultimately that when we say that states are for protection, when we say that states are for creating safety, what we're really saying is that there's scarcity in terms of resources that can be allocated, and we want to fend off the looming specter of death as long as we can. So I believe the logic that governs this world is scarcity and death, and obviously the logic that governs a lot of our world now is profit. And if I believe anything, I believe that Jesus is firmly against the politics of scarcity and offering the possibility of resurrection. He has conquered death by defeating it on the cross, assuming it, and then overcoming it. And basically, I think the early church shared everything in common, and that Jesus said that friendship with money was the root of all evil. So, would Jesus be disappointed? I think there's good reason to believe that American, and particularly American evangelical Christianity, with which I identify myself, needs to think awfully hard about what it means to see the logic of Jesus' investments as opposed to the dogma that articulates American values with Christian values without ever asking in what places do they diverge. And I think we've given up then the prophetic role of the church, which is to hold the culture to account, to get it to be a version of itself which is better than simply giving into the logics of scarcity, the logics of death, and the logics of profit.
And if I could just chime in there, I think you have what I personally believe versus what I could theologically defend. And I can theologically defend the idea of a prophetic Christianity that rises above cultural Christianity and sort of stands above it and says, no, that's incorrect. And I think that's what has to happen.
On what basis? On what basis does it stand above the culture and say that's incorrect? On what grounds?
Well, I think for Christianity to do it, it would be on Christian grounds, i.e., you've messed up the message of Christ, and that's not what Jesus said, and that's not what Jesus thinks. Like, I assume that the prophetic Christians accept the Christian grounds. That's what I'm saying. It's not personal to me, but theologically, they could defend a prophetic response to this movement. And I think they must. And what I was going to say was simply that, Bannon, I'm teaching some of the stuff that he's written right now, alongside Puritanism and alongside the history of the church militant. You know, what Bannon is doing in advising Trump is grounded in an idea of Catholicism that is old and that's fundamental, and that if you care about Christianity and if you care about how the world perceives it, and if you wish to be that prophetic Christianity, it's time to get some historical literacy. It's time to study up on the church militant and to study up on the Christianity that Bannon's about to be using and waving on banners.
This will probably be our last question, and it's to Dr. Rhodes. Student asks, what's the point of going to church and praying if it doesn't matter? And I'll add, in light of all the negative things and the disappointments, right, and the grief and the risks that you've expressed, and yet you've also described a celebration and a joy in those practices. How do those go together, or why stay?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm really happy to end on it. I think it's a positive note to end on. Why go to church and why pray? Because, and if it doesn't matter, one, I think it does matter. So I would never say it doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. Does it matter in terms of your everlasting soul after you die? I don't believe it does. I could be wrong, but I don't believe it does. Does it matter in terms of you connecting with a singular supernatural being who has revealed his truth in one religious tradition but not other ones? I don't believe it does. But it does matter. Recently, I was speaking at a Martin Luther King celebration a couple weeks ago, and I stood up and I looked at an audience a little smaller than this and introduced myself as an unbelieving believer, a Christian agnostic, a Christian atheist, and I said, listen, here's what I want to tell you today. We need more prayer. We've forgotten how to pray, and I've forgotten how to pray, and I'm having to learn it again and learn it anew. Prayer, the root of prayer is not petition. The heart of prayer is not a belief in the supernatural. Prayer is simply about you embodying a humility that the world is bigger than you, and that there's something, you may not be able to name it or articulate it, but there's something bigger than you out there. There's mystery in the world, and we can just call it mystery. And it's humbling yourself before that mystery. I would encourage all of the atheists in the room, when you get home, try to get down on your knees and try to put your head on the floor and get as low as you can. And sit there silently with your phone off for 5 minutes and just say what you want the world to be like. You don't have to say it to anyone. You don't have to believe that anyone hears it. But just do it. Going back to the idea of a practice that comes before belief, just do it. Do it every day for a week and see what happens. It won't change the world. It will change your own attitude toward the world. And in changing your own attitude to the world, then it changes the world. I believe that secular prayer and atheist prayer is one of the things that can save us moving forward.
Any closing comment? Just a minute.
Thank you, San Luis Obispo.
Yes, thank you so much. This is awesome.
Thank you very much.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.